Well, we're back looking at the VMS primers and metal prep products. Today we're going to be looking at the actual primer, and a lot of people are swearing by this. The amazing thing here is that this is a water-based primer. For years, people have been switching from the solvent-based paints, acrylic lacquers and enamels and that sort of thing, to this type of paint, a water-based acrylic paint. The solvent-based paints have, well, dangerous fumes, explosive fumes, but mostly you just don't want to breathe that sort of thing. And just for safety reasons, people started switching over to water-based paints, and now those water-based paints have become so good that a lot of people say, why would I ever want to go back to using acrylic lacquer, for example? Now, I have always been a big fan of acrylic lacquers. Lacquer-based paints, I just like the way they go on. I like working with them. I'm used to working with them. But with all of these paints, you had to apply a proper primer. This is an automotive primer being shot on a Cary white metal body with some brass parts. And you're not going to be able to put most paints directly over metal without a proper primer. And that is certainly true of the water-based acrylics. You can't apply those directly over much of anything. They don't want to go over plastic. They certainly don't want to go directly over metal. And so if you're using a water-based acrylic, you still need to put down a solvent-based primer. And a lot of people said, gee, I wish there was a water-based primer like a water-based acrylic that would function as a primer, so I wouldn't have to use, in this case, a Tamiya rattle can, which has been my favorite primer to use over plastic, but I still have preferred to use an automotive primer over metal, although the Tamiya works well over metal as well. And so that's why the VMS primers have made quite a splash in modeling, because this is a water-based, I don't think it's an acrylic, but it's a water-based paint, a water-based primer that you can put directly over anything. You can put it over resin and 3D prints, plastic, and directly over metal. Now, in our first show on the VMS, we looked at these two products, the Metal Prep 4K and the Universal Weathering Carrier. The Universal Weathering Carrier, I'm not sure why they call it a Universal Weathering Carrier. There's probably some other use, but what everybody seems to be using this for, and what we've been using it for, is a metal cleaner. You can brush this on with a soft cloth and vigorously rub into your brass or whatever metal and really get all of the oils and contaminants off of there before you prime it. The recommendation was to use a Q-tip. I found that that's not a very efficient way to do this, so I'm just using a small swatch of cloth. But the key is really get in there and rub this in, and you can really bring your metal out to a bright finish, a nice clean finish ready for primer. The Metal Prep 4K can be brushed on once the metal is clean, and I thought I put this down before I used the primer, which turns out to be completely unnecessary. This is if you're going to be painting your metal pieces, particularly brush painting, but in theory, once this Metal Prep 4K is put on the metal, you could go ahead with any of your water-based acrylics and shoot them directly over the top of it, or hand brush. And that's the key here, is if you're going to be doing any hand brushing, then this is the proper product to prepare the metal with, a primer, if you will, because you can now come back with your water-based acrylics and brush directly over the top of this. So if you're working with something that you cannot or don't want to airbrush, then this is the way to go. This material, it's not so much like a typical primer as it is like an adhesive almost, like you're coating your metal with a clear adhesive that will stick, bond tightly to the metal and leave behind a surface that you can now paint. And while you can see a brush pattern here from where I brushed it on, there's virtually no actual brush streaks here. If I were to airbrush over the top of this, you would be unaware of these brush strokes underneath. Okay, on to the VMS No Peel Surface Primer. Those other products we looked at in much more depth in our last video. What we really want to talk about today is the No Peel Surface Primers. A water-based primer that can go over any surface, plastic, resin, 3D print, metal, and it has like an adhesive in it similar to the Metal Prep 4K, only it's mixed right in with the primer paint, and it comes in like 9 different colors. In my case, I wanted to use the black primer because it's just the right color for what I want to do on these railings. So I'm going to put the primer on and just call that good enough. The primer is pre-thinned. You don't need to mess with that at all. In fact, they tell you not to attempt to thin it or change it in any way. Just airbrush it directly as it comes in the bottle. It tends to settle to the bottom of the bottle, and so it requires a lot of vigorous shaking. They've actually got a mixing ball, a ceramic mixing ball in the bottle, and at first you won't even know it's there because it's stuck in the material. But if you just keep vigorously shaking it, pretty soon that ball comes loose, and then things start really mixing up. I tried using my paint mixer with it, and if it was already mixed to the point where the ball was loose and things were pretty much loose, this may help. Otherwise, it's kind of a waste of time because everything still wants to be stuck in the bottom of the bottle. So paint mixer, not really such a grand idea. Just vigorously shake it. Depending on how long it's been on the shelf or if it's a new product that you just purchased, you may find that you need to shake it for even 4 or 5 minutes to really get it properly mixed. From that point on, probably just a good vigorous shaking for 60 seconds will do the job. Now, just a quick note on airbrush. I use the Badger 150. I know it's not the world's greatest airbrush, but I'm used to it. The thing is, I don't want to cross-contaminate my lacquer-based paints with my water-based paints, and so I actually maintain 2 complete brushes. This one for my lacquers, and now this one for my water-based paints. And so that's what I'm going to be shooting the primer with, is the water-based airbrush. I just don't want to cross-contaminate those lacquers into my water-based paints. I have found that goes really badly when that happens. Now, they recommend a PSI of at least 25. I've turned it up to 30 here. I generally shoot it just under 25. I want to make sure that I'm moving enough air because apparently this requires a bit more air pressure than you're used to with other paints. It loads very simply because it's just straight out of the bottle here. It's already got a little drip nozzle, and you can just dribble that right into your color cup and you're ready to go. Now, as always, working in finer coats, but I'm using a larger tip here with the larger air pressure. Boy, this stuff just really wants to go out there, and I think that's just fine. It's going on really nice. And hopefully this is really adhering to the metal and forming a really strong bond with the brass. I'm applying 2 different coats. It seems that that's all it's really taking. I want to make sure I'm getting into all of the various nooks and crannies, shooting from different angles, and then going over twice just to make sure I've got a good coating on here without overdoing it, of course. But it's great. It really went on smoothly. And once it's dry here, it really is an indestructible paint surface. Now they say not to brush this, to only airbrush it, but now that I've got the stanchions for the railings done, I need to do the rails themselves. And I thought, you know, even though it's a little off-label, I'm going to go in here with a paintbrush and just brush this material directly onto the railings. And, you know, true to form, it isn't going on very well at all this way. So definitely an airbrush product, but I kept coming back and going over this, and eventually I got railings that I liked just by brushing that material onto the rails. And again, where the stanchions have been airbrushed, man, they turned out great. And it's a really, really rugged paint surface. Now, another thing I need to paint are the main beams that go under the turntable deck, these huge beams, and they're made almost entirely out of evergreen plastic laminated over wood. But then I've also used metal rivet strips that I get from Phil's Narrow Gauge for the riveted seams on here. So I'm mixing both brass and plastic, and the VMS primer says it'll work on both, so I'm going to take them at their word and shoot the VMS primer directly on here. In this case, the pieces are really large, flat sections. It's going to require moving a lot more paint to get it done. This is what I'm trying to recreate here, is the bottom beam underneath the deck. And they're very weathered. It's painted silver, and then there's a lot of material, coal dust and whatnot, that's flowed down on there from above, and that's an effect I really want to recreate. So I'm just going to go ahead and shoot them with a primer that'll be completely covered up. I'm going to use the gray primer in this case. And as always, working in thinner coats. Now I'm making a mistake here that I discovered later on, in part because it's such a large piece it won't even fit inside the paint booth. I'm working a little too far back. Yes, it's good to work in fine coats, but if you're too far back, the paint will actually set up slightly as it travels through the air, and you'll get a more raised surface, if you will, a more textured surface. You want to work in closer, and in this case I'm using on my trigger a little too much air to paint mixture. I want to get the paint moving on there with a wet edge, even though I want to put it on in a finer coat. Does that make sense? So don't do what I'm doing here. Make sure that as the paint is going on, it definitely is going on with a wet surface, even though you still want to be working in the thinnest possible coat. This particular paint, it works better if it's going on wet. So here's my finished primer. I've actually got, I think, 4 coats on here in order to get good coverage. And because I've put on so many coats, and because I was using too much air to paint, and again, not maintaining a wet quality to the paint, there's a slightly raised texture to it. And so I went ahead with some 1200 grit sandpaper and just very lightly sanded the flat surfaces between the rivet areas in order to reduce that somewhat raised texture. And then I wanted to rattle can with testers the silver paint, and I'm not going to try to completely cover because I'm going for this weathered look. So I'm not putting a complete coverage on here with my tester silver. And because I'm using a rattle can, I don't use rattle cans in the paint booth and make a huge mess. So I take that outside and shoot it on a piece of cardboard. I could have shot the rattle can directly on here without a primer, but I was concerned about the metal rivet strips. They would be quite fragile with an enamel just painted directly over them. And this way I'm getting really good adhesion on both the plastic and the brass strips. You can, of course, still see some of the primer coming through because I haven't put a really heavy coat with the rattle can on here. And then as I come back with some weathering washes, the fact that it is somewhat irregular just adds to the weathered appearance of the whole thing. I think it's turning out quite nice. ultimately I'm going to come back with my airbrush and put some more dark streaks on here. After everything is assembled and working correctly, I will do final touch-up paint on here and final weather. There will be a show on the construction of the turntable on how I built the railings and all of that. Here I just wanted to talk about the VMS primers, and I'm so happy with those. Those are working out really well, and I can understand why it's getting such rave reviews online. And it's really a great product, a water-based primer. Who'd have ever thought it? Well, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please consider subscribing. It's painless. All you have to do is click on the upcoming blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring. And Karen and I will see you here on Sunday. See you then. Bye-bye.